Hello everyone, welcome to Engineering Career Online Summit. Today in this interview, we have with us Sugandha Sharma, who is currently a PhD student in Massachusetts Institute of Technology in USA. She's going to talk about an interesting field of computational neuroscience. So let's welcome her and get some useful insight about this field. So hi Sugandha, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you too, and it is amazing to have you to be a part of this summit.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, so Sugandha, let's start this interview by, you're telling us about this term, computational neuroscience, because it is not widely known. So what can you tell about this field?
Yeah, sure. So this is a very exciting time for computational neuroscience. So neuroscience itself is a relatively new field. We used to have biology before and psychology, and then we realized we need to have a separate field to study the nervous system and the brain, and then came the neuroscience. But within neuroscience, computational neuroscience or computational and cognitive neuroscience kind of go together these days. And these are basically a subset of neuroscience. And the questions which they ask are at the computational level. So for instance, what are the computational properties or what are the computations that the brain is carrying out? And given the computations that the brain is carrying out, what algorithms does it use to implement those computations? And then the third question is, given the computation and the algorithms the brain might be using to implement them, how do these computations get realized in the human brain, in the biological substrate of the human brain? So these are the kinds of questions that computational neuroscience tries to answer. There's another branch which also falls under computational neuroscience, which is when you collect data. So within neuroscience, we use different animal models to study the brain because we cannot get data out of the human brain all the time. And so, we use mice, we use rats, we use monkeys, and these animals are trained to perform different tasks, and then we collect data from them. And the data is usually in the form of spiking activity from the neurons in their brains. And so computational neuroscience also encompasses the area where you have this data and then you analyze it using different computational models and computational techniques. So these are the two things, right? One is data analysis. So you can get trained as a data scientist almost if you are doing a PhD in computational neuroscience. And another aspect is that you are building models of different parts of the brain to understand how different parts of the brain work. What are the computations, what are the algorithms, how they might be realized in the physical substrate. And the third thing is theoretical, where you write equations to explain how things might be going on in the brain in mathematical terms. We use different frameworks for building these models of different parts of the brain. So I have this cartoon neuron here just for illustration purposes. So
Okay.
basically, this is what a neuron looks like, not literally, but this is a cartoon figure, obviously. So this part is the soma. It's called the cell body, and then the cell has these dendrites. Usually these dendrites are longer than what's shown here. And then this is the axon terminal, and then these are the terminal branches of the axon. So these usually synapse at a different neuron at the end. And so usually you'll have signals coming in through these inputs. They build up in the cell body, and then you have an action potential firing through the axon. And then that's how the neurons communicate with each other. And so we have different frameworks, and some frameworks allow you to model this whole cell along with the details like dendrites, axons, axon terminals. And one of the examples of that framework is called Neuron. It's a simulating environment, and it lets you model a cell with details like a diameter of a dendrite, what properties of axons, and so on. And the benefit of these frameworks is that basically you can model details and you can do experiments like what's the effect of drugs, for instance, on these. So you can inject drugs and you can see how the neural population behaves when you inject a certain drug and so on. So the low level investigations can be done in a computational way. On the other hand, there are also frameworks which allow you to build large scale models. But since the models need to scale up, the detail is limited. So you can abstract away some details because you might not need that for certain functionality or behavior. And then you can, so in that case, this whole neuron would just be a point, just a point. So it gets inputs there's point neurons, and you have output spiking outputs once the current reaches a certain level. And so most of the times we use those simplistic models because we want to relate our models to the behavior of the animal and the actual data. But it always depends. Which framework you use always depends on what you're studying. So I'm going to show you one of those frameworks, which is called Nengo, Nengo. It's a simulation environment, and you can use them to basically build large-scale neural models and connect them to function and behavior in the brain. So let me try to share my screen here.
Sure.
All right. So this is it. So here what I have is a neural model, which is a model of decision making in the brain. So what's happening here is that basically this is a neural population which I'm using to model the prefrontal cortex. And here we have 3 inputs which are going into the model. And so it's basically, this was an experiment where a monkey was trained to perform decision-making tasks. So based on the context, it had to make a decision either based on motion or color. So it was shown motion stimulus, it was shown color stimulus, and it was supposed to make a decision based on whether most of the dots on a screen are moving towards the left or right, or whether most of the dots on the screen are red colored or green colored. So those were the two. So do you understand that? The stimulus is the same. You have a random dot pattern on the screen, but all the dots are either moving towards left or right, and the dots are 2 different colors, red and green.
So what does going to left or right indicate? Like what was the basis of this study? What were you trying to test out of this?
So the point was that the goal was to study decision making, context-based decision making, right?
Okay.
So given a certain context, the animal was trained to make its decision either based on the motion of the dots or based on the color of the dots.
Okay.
So here what we've modeled this decision-making process is as if there's an integrator and a threshold population. So let me just run this model and show you some of the characteristics of these neural populations. It takes a little bit to build up, but basically this is an integrator. So it has 1,000 neurons, and all neurons are connected to each other. And this is an example of how the algorithm of integration is implemented in a neural substrate.
Okay.
Right? We know, we know that if we integrate a velocity, we get position, but how do neurons do it? And so this model is an example of how neurons might integrate. So 1,000 neurons all connected to each other via recurrent connections. And then we can look at, this is just to show, these are the tuning curves or response curves of the neurons in these populations. So this is the input current, and this is the firing rate of the neurons.
Okay.
How the neurons respond to the input stimulus. And
so what do you infer from this result that is seen right now?
So this is the model. This is how we modeled the neurons. So
okay.
So we say that, okay, this is the non-linearity that the neurons have. And this is modeled after actual biology. We know that neurons have this kind of response function where they reach a threshold and then they fire. And their firing rate follows a response, something like this. So this particular model is called leaky integrate and fire neuron. There are many, there are 2 or 3 different models which have more details and less details. But this is a pretty biologically realistic spiking neuron model.
Okay, all right. So it seems like this field is very much, relevant to people who are so much passionate about, biology as well as are an engineer, and they can like mix both of these and, try to provide or contribute their work in this. It's a very fascinating field, seems.
Right. Yeah, that's true. So what's interesting is that within computational neuroscience, it's actually best if you come from a quantitative background. There are people who also do computational neuroscience from a mostly biology background, but mostly if you have background in maths, physics, or engineering, then it's very, very beneficial for you, because then it's not difficult for you to catch up on, building models or understanding the math behind them, writing equations and figuring out how to relate that to the data which you get from experiments.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much for showing this. I think this is wonderful. And you said this, the name of this framework is Nengo, right? Nengo.
Right, yes. And it's an open source simulation environment, so anyone can use it. It's free of cost. And it's actually developed at a lab which I was working in at Waterloo.
Okay, that's awesome. Oh, so this software itself was developed from the university itself.
Yeah. So
that's amazing.
There's a Center for Theoretical Neuroscience at Waterloo, and all the people in the lab work together to build this environment, and many people around the world use it to build their models.
That's amazing. So could you, Sugandha, provide some practical applications of these fields, and in what other ways can people use this software Nengo? Like, for what other applications can they use it for?
Right. So Nengo is pretty flexible in that it's open source, it's Python based, and anyone can contribute to it. So it already has different neuron models built into it. So for instance, some people use artificial neural networks for their modeling, right? And within artificial neural networks, they use sigmoid neurons or rate neurons. The example I showed, we were using spiking neurons. And so there are different neuron models already built into the environment, which you can use. Apart from that, if there is a new neuron model that you want to add, one can add them. There's also connections of Nengo with deep learning. It's called Nengo DL. And if you were doing deep learning, you could basically integrate it with Nengo in order to make it more biologically plausible, because some of these networks lack biological plausibility. There's no synapses, there's no temporal aspect to these models sometimes. So it provides you flexibility. And in terms of kind of models, there have been many large scale models which have been built. Like you can build, for instance, if you wanted to model lamprey swimming. So lamprey is a fish and it shows oscillatory swimming patterns. So you could, basically you can build dynamical models, oscillations, or any kind of computations which you might hypothesize that a certain part of the brain is doing. Memory, basal ganglia cortex, action selection. So all those kinds of things.
All right. And how about the practical or real world applications of the field of computational neuroscience?
Right. So there are many applications, and I think a lot of the applications are very influential. So for instance, one application is neural prosthetics. So if you could understand the brain and how our nervous system interacts with the brain, let's say, there's a person with amputee. And so what we can do is we can build a prosthetic arm and help that person to install that prosthetic arm such that the arm also is in communication with their brain. And one example was that of that I saw in Caltech. When I was at Caltech, I was visiting. Professor Richard Anderson over there. He built a prosthetic arm where he trained a patient to operate that prosthetic arm just by thinking. So the motor cortex, which usually controls our muscular movements, was damaged for that patient. And there's a parietal cortex, which is in the middle of our brain here, and that controls our imagination. So through imagination, the patient was able to control their prosthetic arm and eat food themselves. So that's pretty cool. And I think as we advance, we're going to see more and more of prosthetics, neural prosthetics being built. The other thing is implants, neural implants, which is similar to prosthetics, but they're different in the sense that they're implanted within your brain. So we are very far off from there yet, but there have been efforts. For instance, if you have hippocampus damage, hippocampus is implicated in memory. So many patients who have hippocampal damage, they can't form new memories. And so that's called amnesia, anterograde or retrograde amnesia. Either they can't form new memories or they can't recall the previous past. They can be depending on where the lesion in the brain is. And so what happens is that if we can make implants that we can substitute these parts in the brain, then the damage can become reversible, right? Right now it's irreversible. Then there are also clinical applications in this Okay, so these are the clinical applications, but there's also other applications like AI. So many computer scientists are now working with neuroscientists, and within cognitive science, there's a lot of work on understanding higher level intelligence within humans. And if we could understand how a brain does it, then it would be much easier to actually build learning rules within artificial machines. So there's a lot of research and development. How do we learn things, and how do we grow and learn during our development as children?
I'll just see the question. All right. Okay, so Sugandha, how did you get into this field, or how did you find your way here? Did something inspire you, or did you do some projects that motivated you in this field?
Right. So that's a very good question. And my own journey has been very exciting and very less planned. So what happened was I did my undergrad in engineering. And I always was fascinated by two main questions. One was how the brain works, and the other one was the universe, what's out there, and where are we? And
Right.
so those were very fascinating questions to me. And it was just like Waterloo's engineering program's pretty hectic. So at the end of the day, I would just come down to my room and YouTube some words like universe, string theory, cognition, brain, or something, and then randomly watch videos on these topics just because I enjoyed them. And so one fine day, I just stumbled upon this video on the largest brain model, the largest functional brain model, by Chris Smith. And it was a TED talk, and I watched it, and I was very inspired. And when I Googled his name, it turned out that he was at the same university, University of Waterloo, where I was doing my undergrad. So I was pretty pleasantly surprised, and I just immediately emailed him. I'm like, I read your paper on, I watched your talk. I also ended up reading his paper, which was related to that talk. So I emailed him. I'm like, I read your paper. I don't really understand it. It goes above my head. So I would like to understand it. I have some questions, and can we meet? So he said yes. And so before I went to meet him, I knew he was the director of this theoretical neuroscience center at Waterloo, and I was sure that he's going to be a very busy person, and that probably talk to me for 10 minutes or so. But when I went there, we ended up talking for an hour. And
Wow.
yeah, it was interesting because the learning was that people are willing to talk about their research, and people are willing to talk to young students. They're very welcoming, even though they are busy. They're always welcoming, and they're happy to talk about their research, answer questions about their research. And so that conversation led me to doing a research assistantship under him. Um, and this was before I graduated. I did an undergraduate research assistantship, and then during that period, I also took a course which he was teaching. His course was known as Simulating Neurobiological Systems, and the framework which I just showed, Nengo,
Okay.
uh,
Yeah.
this is based on neural engineering framework. And basically in his course he taught all of that, everything that went behind building that framework. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was very fascinating to me. And after that, I decided to just put my industry jobs and interviews on hold and just focus on research and just trying to explore and see whether I would be interested in pursuing it forward.
Mm-hmm.
And one important thing that I did for myself was just not commit to it. So I'm not saying commitment is bad, but what I mean is when I went and did my internships in companies, um, it was a different experience, and I didn't feel like I found what I wanted to do. So in this case, I didn't want to commit myself. So I told Chris that I just wanted to work as an RA for some time before I committed to doing a master's. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I did. And during that time, I did research independently and with him, and published papers. And then I was sure after a while, after I think 4 to 6 months, I was sure that okay, this is what I want to do. And so then I committed to a master's degree. And
Okay.
so during my master's, I did a lot of work in the same area, which led me to deciding to do a PhD.
Okay, I think that's wonderful, and that's a very good approach, because initially when students come across these terms, and like you said, you were curious, so you googled it up, you found TED talks, and you went on YouTube and found such things. Usually what students do is they stop there. Okay, this is amazing and this is what I want to do. I mean, it works wonders in some cases, but I think sometimes you just restrict yourself at that just one spot and just blind yourself from all other wonderful things as well. So it's good to explore, and even that's what you did. You were exploring, you did internships, you did this, you tried what you like about this or what you don't like about this, and then you made a decision. So I think that's a wonderful approach.
Right. And I think also in exploration, one very important thing is that when you're exploring something, you have to give it some time. Like you have to give it a couple months. It shouldn't be that you explored this for 10 days and then you hopped on something else. That way you wouldn't find out whether you really liked something or not. You might feel like you did,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not the truth. So usually, even when I was doing my internships, right, I gave my best to my internships, and that's what I recommend. You give your best, you excel at it, and then you figure out, okay, did you enjoy it, and would you do it again,
Right.
right? And so exploring is good, but
Mm-hmm.
make sure that you give enough time to each thing you're exploring so that
Right.
you actually understand yourself. So awareness, self-awareness, very important. So you
True.
have to understand whether you liked it or not, and whether you put in enough effort and you still didn't like it, or whether there's something else that fascinates you more than this.
Right. That's very true. And the other thing that you did was you had hands-on experience. It wasn't that you kept reading. You actually went out and saw what it is in reality. So I think even that's very important. It's a very important thing to do.
Right,
Right.
right. Yeah, completely agree.
Right. Okay. All right. Okay. So what are the different job profiles that a student can segue into from this field in industry or in research in any way?
Right. So if you are doing a PhD in neuroscience, you might have backgrounds in very different fields. And so, for instance, my background is in engineering. But you might also have a background in neuroscience, for instance, right? And so it really depends on your background. But at the same time, no matter what your background is, you have jobs in research and education. So a lot of people will end up working as research scientists, either within labs in universities or in independent research institutes. So there is Allen Institute of Brain Science, for instance, which who will recruit many people. There are institutes around here, around MIT, various research institutes which are privately owned but affiliated with these universities, and there are professors working there, or there are independent labs being run there. So there's universities where you can work as research scientists. There are independent research institutions where you can go and work as research scientists. You can of course become a professor at any university. So this is under the realm of research and education. But
Okay.
then you can also go to industry, and there's enormous amount of biotechnology industry around in Boston Cambridge area.
Okay.
So if you are if you worked with techniques like fMRI, electrophysiology, EEG during your PhD, then you have some expertise in in these technologies, and you can work with biotechnology companies to actually improve and provide those technologies further to researchers. So that's another area. The third area is being a data scientist. So if during your PhD you did a lot of data analysis and modeling, computational work, then you can easily, whether in the field of neuroscience or whether in any other field, you have the skills to do data science basically. So you could
Right.
go and be a data scientist. These days within industry, especially under the realm of artificial intelligence, there is a very high demand for computational neuroscientists, because we've reached a point where we have built excellent machines, but we don't really understand how to build very intelligent machines, right?
Right.
So that's one area where everyone in AI is looking to neuroscience for help. And so a lot of computational neuroscience scientists can be found under DeepMind. For instance, the founder of DeepMind himself is a cognitive neuroscientist.
All
So
right.
yeah, so he was actually a postdoc here at MIT, and I think he did his PhD somewhere else. But he himself is a cognitive neuroscientist, and they're looking to hire cognitive and computational neuroscientists all the time. So I think the field is very ripe at this point. It's an excellent time to be in this field right now, if
Okay.
anyone was interested.
True. So Sugita, now, like, if you talk about India right now, then the undergrad that people do in, it's usually like it's electrical or mechanical, computer science. Like there are very generic engineering fields that are prevalent. So if a student wants to pursue a career in computational neuroscience, what are the other concepts or other skills or that they have to develop, or how do they build their portfolio right when they are in college itself, so they can build those skills before they graduate?
Right. I think like I'm not completely sure about India, but my impression is that in India, basic science is not being given a lot of importance. There is a lot of focus on medicine and engineering, um,
Right.
but you know, this is one of the misconceptions also, which is there around the field of neuroscience and around the field of basic science as a whole within India. That
Right.
usually if you're doing science, people think you failed to become a doctor, and that's why you're doing science.
Yeah, I know, like BSc and MSc, they're like, they wouldn't opt it. They are like all prone to getting into engineering. That's very true.
Right.
Or doctor, yeah.
Right. So I think, especially within India, we need to do more work to actually um, raise awareness about basic science and develop good facilities to be able to do good basic science, because like basic science then feeds into the progress of your country, right? In both science and technology, it leads
Right.
to technology as well, right? So we'll be able to be better innovators. But in terms of building portfolio, I think having an engineering background, especially if you want to do computational neuroscience, is perfect. So there isn't a contradiction there. There are many students here, and we are all from different backgrounds. So even if you did engineering as an undergrad, it's perfect. You could do mathematics, you could do physics. I think if you wanted to do basic neuroscience apart from computational neuroscience, so more on the biology side, then you definitely need more exposure to biology and neurosciences during your undergrad. Um, and what I personally did was I took a lot of courses in psychology uh, during my master's.
Okay.
So usually if you are focusing on one field, you can expose yourself to a different field which you're interested in by taking courses in it as your electives, right? So that's one thing you can do, but I would still suggest like picking one major, whether it's engineering or it's biology or it's mathematics or physics. Focus on that, and then uh, just substitute your knowledge in other fields by taking electives and by just exposing yourself. And I think that's on the education side. That would be it. And I think in general, just staying aware of the field. If you already know, the most important thing is you need to know what you want to do, right? And that's not easy, especially at an undergrad level. So there's no need to panic about that. You know,
Right.
yeah, you just need to have a vague idea and build a strong quantitative background, so that will help you in the long run in any field you go, basically.
That's true. Yeah. And in case it's not being provided in the college, then now there are online resources. You could just take some certifications or just, find such resources on YouTube. And I think those are also good ways to learn as well.
Yeah, so one interesting thing is that a lot of the courses which are taught at MIT, they are online and also free of cost. So basically
Okay.
you have of course you have Coursera, EDX,
Mhm.
Udacity, which you can use to take online courses. There's also MIT OpenCourseWare, and there are YouTube channels that MIT has. So one of them is called CBMM, that's called Center for Brains, Minds and Machines. And so
Okay.
if you go to their YouTube channel, there's all the courses which I'm taking here, every lecture is recorded and put online. So that's a
Okay.
great resource for people to just learn
Yes,
from
definitely.
online lectures.
Okay. Would you recommend some particular videos for undergrad students so that they could get a basic idea about this?
About computational neuroscience in general.
Right.
Um, I think,
Like, like you mentioned, artificial intelligence or some algorithm development or something like that.
right. I think if you go to CBMM's website, there
Mhm.
are certain videos. There's no particular video that's coming to my mind in, uh, in specific.
Or probably rather, let me rephrase. Some core concepts that students could Google like during those videos so that they could know the basic idea. They could get a basic idea of that, like which you get to use day to day. Like you said, there's neuroscience, and then there's neural networks or data science, artificial intelligence. Any core concepts that they could look up.
Right. I think neural modeling is one, right? Building models. There are different aspects to different things. Like you could Google biophysics, for instance, and that's a different way of looking at neuroscience. When you look at the biophysical mechanisms that are involved at the implementation level, then there's cognitive science, and right now in cognitive science, neurosymbolic approaches are very famous. I mean, it's an open question, and like looking into some neurosymbolic approaches and googling that might help. But in general, I think the best way is to go to the conference websites and look at the papers that are coming out of conferences, or even like some conferences have their audio and videos online, so watching them can give them a good idea of what the field is about. Going to conferences, if you have an opportunity, is a great idea to expose yourself to what's happening in the field in general.
Right, definitely. So Sugandha, do you need some good programming skills or algorithm development skills for this field?
If you're doing computational neuroscience, then definitely. So especially if you're building models, all you're doing is basically using Python most of the time. So Python is a must. There are libraries like NumPy. Depending on what framework you want to use for modeling, you might need to start using that framework and get expertise in that framework. Like I said, people use Nengo, Neuron. You can also use artificial neural networks, in which case you might want to develop expertise either in TensorFlow or in PyTorch. So those are both frameworks which allow you to use built-in libraries for building artificial neural networks. So yes, definitely, if you have a good grasp of programming, it's a must and it's needed if you're doing computational neuroscience.
Okay, got it. So when you were mentioning about the internships that you did when you were exploring, right? Could you talk a bit about that and what did you learn from each role?
Sure. Yeah. So I did a bunch of internships. I think five different companies. And I think first of all, I want to say that my most important learning was what I liked and what I didn't like. Right. So when I was doing these, so because I did my internships at an undergrad level, I haven't done any internship after that. But during my undergrad, when I would go to a company, I would be given a project. And usually, even though the project might or might not be challenging, you end up finding that, okay, everyone knows that this is doable, right? So for me, it was the fact that I didn't feel satisfied, even if I gave my 100%. And, it was obvious that, okay, this is an algorithm which I need to write, or this is an application which I need to write. And it was obvious that, yes, I can write it given enough time. But that wasn't very challenging to me and wasn't very fulfilling for me. And so that led me to explore other avenues, right? It led me to, I mean, that's one of the reasons I might have gone and talked to Chris, right? Because I wasn't satisfied from within in terms of what I was doing at my internship. So I think that's actually, to be honest, that's one of the major learnings for me, to be self-aware while you're doing your internships. Because technical skills you will gain, right? There'll be different technical skills which you'll gain from different internships. And all of them are useful in the long run as well. But I think whenever you are interning, be self-aware, talk to yourself and be cognizant about the fact that how your experience is going, and whether you enjoy what you're doing, whether you don't. And if you enjoy what you're doing, because if you spend enough time on doing something, you might start enjoying it. And it's possible that initially you didn't, but if you spend enough time, you start enjoying it, and it's possible that, you decide to pursue it further. So I think that's the most important learning for me. On the technical side, my internships were I did internships at NVIDIA, AMD, BlackBerry, and I think another very important thing is working with teams. So I think when you are, whether it's industry or academia, I think it's very important to develop your soft skills so that you are able to work with people around you, because working with people around you cannot always be easy. There'll be people from all over the world, and there'll be people from all kinds of different backgrounds and all kinds of different personalities. So you really have to be flexible and mold yourself according to the environment you're working in, especially when you're working in different environments. So I think that's another very important thing to keep in mind.
Okay, all right. And what about different projects? Did you undertake any projects while you were in undergrad? And could you talk about them in brief?
In undergrad. So my fourth year design project was a blind navigation assisting device. So it was basically a belt that you wear around your waist, and it had actuators. So what we did was we installed actuators on that belt, and we were using a 3D camera for detecting obstacles in the field of view of the person who's wearing the belt. So it was basically an assistive device for the blind people to be walking. So the belt had almost 120-degree range, and so depending on how close the obstacle is, the intensity of the vibration used to increase, so that the person who's walking in an environment can know how close I am to the obstacle and whether it's right. So also this the actuators were divided into left, right, and center. So they know based on vibrations whether something is on my right or on my left or in the center, and how I can go around to avoid those obstacles. So this required image processing, dealing like interfacing with hardware and software, and installing actuators, etc. Um, I think that was our FIDP, but I can talk about projects in that I did in my master's degree.
Sure, yeah.
So well, the one of the projects which I did was this one, which the model which I showed, which is the context-based decision-making model. So basically, there's a neural population which is making decisions based on the context and what input is coming in the form of the stimulus into the population. And so depending on the context, this neural population either integrates motion or color.
Okay.
And then the decision is made based on whether the context was the motion context or the color context. So
Okay.
the hypothesis, now I don't know how much detail I should go into, but the hypothesis was multiplicative gating. So this was one of the hypotheses which we built into the model, that the recurrent connection on the population which is doing integration is gated, and based on the context it gates one of the stimuli, either color or motion, and the other stimulus gets integrated. So that was one project. The other project which I did in my master's was basically it was very theoretical project. There I used statistics literature to come up with a model where I'm representing probability distributions in neural circuits. So
Okay.
the right, so the idea is that we're dealing with probabilities all the time, right? We're dealing with uncertainties. So for instance, if I'm crossing the road and I see a vehicle coming towards me at a certain speed, I can gauge whether I should cross the road or not, right? If the vehicle is slow, far away, I usually cross. I know what the uncertainty is and what the probability of me hitting the vehicle would be, right? So the question is how do our brains do it, right? How do our brains do this computation? And so what I did in that project was present or propose a way in which our brains might be encoding probability distributions and the uncertainty which comes out of these distributions using neural populations.
Okay.
And then also the fact that we learn these distributions from our experiences of the world, right? There's no other way we could have learned them. So we were exposed to the world, we learned these distributions. And so I also proposed a way of learning these distributions in a biologically plausible way, and then using this learned distribution to make inferences which affect our daily life behavior.
Okay, that's awesome. I think this I'm sure it would be very interesting while you were doing these, and it also intersects with your passion and your learning as well. So I'm sure it would be very interesting.
Right? Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm so happy to be in my field.
That's awesome. So, Sugandha, apart from all these technical projects that you have done, you have also undertaken many volunteering and leadership roles, whether it be in women in engineering or for imparting education. So, could you talk about that experience?
Right. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I've been very enthusiastic about just like, talking to people, helping them out, or, giving back to the community in general. And recently here, so during my undergrad, I did a bunch of things. Like, I used to volunteer for Tutoring Beyond Borders. And so I was one of the tutors, and basically I gave one-on-one lessons uh, in mathematics, and English and sciences to 3 different students. And that's
Okay.
very rewarding usually. Here, when I came to MIT, I've been doing a lot of things here as well. So, for instance, I just started a journal club. So I like
Okay.
bringing people together to learn and to share with each
Yeah.
other what we are learning and our experiences. So the journal club is basically a club that meets once every week. And so what we do is we just decide on a paper, and we either read, one person leads the discussion, 1 or 2 people, sometimes we do it jointly. And so
Mhm.
we'll lead a discussion, we'll discuss a paper, and during the summer we'll be having tutorials, so hands-on tutorials. We get together, some people lead and teach other people how to use a certain framework. um,
Mhm.
and I did a talk myself on Lingo recently, so that's been fun for me. Another thing which I've been doing here is I am organizing peer lectures. So that's
Okay.
similar, but it's also, so the journal club is for postdocs, faculty, and students. Uh,
Mhm.
and the peer lectures is only for graduate students. So it's a time when graduate students come together, and it doesn't have to be neuroscience. So for instance, someone is passionate about music. They'll just, tell us about music, and we just spend time together. And that's because I think having that social connection with each other is very important
True.
for all of us. Um,
Mhm.
and apart from that, there are lots of opportunities here. So for instance, on Girls' Day, we went to the MIT Museum, and we just, I took a bunch of sheep brains, and they were like tiny tiny girls coming, and I was like dissecting the brains and showing them how the brains look. And some of them were like, wow, and some of them were like, oh no, it's disgusting.
Yeah.
So it was a
I
lot
can
of,
imagine that. Yeah.
yeah. And then there's another thing which I just went for a training yesterday, and that's called Summer HSSP. So it's basically high school students come to university, and then we teach them. And so we are right now working on a curriculum for a course which we call Sensational Neuroscience. So
Okay.
that's basically, we're going to teach them basic things about the brain, how it works, misconceptions, the functions of different parts, and then show them some demos, give them a tour of some of the facilities, and show them MRI,
It's
EEG,
amazing.
genetics.
That's amazing that because if they have such basics right when they're in high school, it's just fascinating, not just to get information, but it's just so interesting that there's so many new things out there that you can learn and explore.
Right, right. There's lots of opportunities.
Right.
And
And I think, sorry, yes, go ahead.
yeah, and I think it's great to, like, also for me to have those opportunities to be able to utilize them and give back to the community.
Definitely, definitely. And I think by you starting all these clubs, I think that's a wonderful idea even for undergrads. While they are in undergrad, they could start these things. Like if you want to learn some programming language, you could just form a club, like meet once a week, or if you want to meet about speaking, start that.
Right, right. Usually, yeah, usually it works out very well if there are, people around who have similar interests. So
Hmm.
you're talking about programming reminds me, we used to do a Python programming workshop at Waterloo. So it was basically, you just advertise. The procedure to organize something is just, you advertise. You have to find ways to advertise in whichever university or college you are. But once you've decided what you want to do, you advertise that. And then we had an application process, because unexpectedly the response was so high. So many people wanted to learn Python. And so
Hmm.
we had to,
Yeah.
if there are 200 applicants, we had to choose 50 students because we only have limited instructors. So choosing them, and then developing the curriculum, it's a lot of fun. And I think yeah, I would encourage people to do it for anything they're interested in, whether it's
Mhm.
a formal setting or informal setting. And don't, like, just feel confident and just go out and try it out. I mean, worst case is it doesn't work out, which is fine, right? It's better than not doing anything. So
Yes, yes, definitely. And I have seen that whenever you go for some club or some initiative, it might not be related to what you want, but just the feeling of being there and being present there can give you some other idea
right,
that which fascinates you or inspires you. So you never know. It just go out and interact, network with people. So I think these are some wonderful ways to do that.
right, definitely.
Okay, I'll just look at the questions. Okay. So I think you have already mentioned, but again, I would like to ask that what made you stand out in your application, while whether it be for applying for internships or for applying for MIT, because MIT is considered one of the world's best university to study in. So was that always your goal to study in MIT, or are you there because there's good research going on? So could you talk about that?
Right. Yeah. So, no, it was never my goal to be at MIT. I never thought I would be at MIT. I mean, as I said, right, after undergrad, I was still in exploratory mode and I was figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. And when I joined my master's, I was pretty sure that I wanted to do a master's, but I was still not sure about a PhD. And I think after 1 year of master's, I was like thinking, okay, yeah, this sounds like, it sounds like I want to do more of research, and there's you know more training needed to do this. And that's when I started thinking about doing a PhD. And so, no, I looked at a bunch of universities that I was interested in, and that were having good research in the field that I was interested in. So it's very important to make sure that you have professors who you'd be interested in working with at the institution that you're going to. So it doesn't, I mean, if MIT didn't have theoretical neuroscience or computational neuroscience professors, I wouldn't be here, right? Just because it's MIT doesn't mean that you go to MIT. So yeah, I applied to a bunch of universities, of course, and then depending on where I found the best match, I chose that university. And I think in terms of standing out, especially for PhD, I think there's no comparison to having done research and having publications. Usually that's important. And usually, even if you don't have publications, you should have at least some research experience. That's the most basic thing that's required. So if you have some research experience, then all you need during the interview process is to know what you did in those experiences. As long as you know and you got an interview, then you can talk to people. You can figure out whether you have a good match between your interests and the other people's interests or the professor's interests who you are interviewing with. And usually, interview is a good time to figure out whether there is a match or not
Right.
between. And it's also a good idea before the application process to contact professors who you think you might be interested in working with, and then have some back and forth. Or even if the professors don't reply, sometimes they're busy, they're grad students. You can contact them, ask them questions about what kind of work is going on in the lab, whether it matches your interests. And usually grad students are very enthusiastic about talking to new applicants about their lab and telling them. So I think that's a good way to go about it.
Okay.
I think regarding internships, what made me stand out in my internships? I think usually it was my previous work experience that was very important. And I found my first internship during my undergrad was just my first year. So I think at that point, since you don't have any experience, sometimes your grades can matter because it's your first experience. They don't have anything to judge you on. So
True.
they might judge you, especially on grades in the courses which might be relevant to the job that you're applying for. But you'll see that as you go on, the grades start to matter less and less. That doesn't mean you should just like flunk your classes and not do well.
Yeah.
But it's just numbers are not the most important thing in life. Your learning matters a lot more. And so maybe initially they'll matter, but as you go on, your experience starts to matter much more. And I would say again, self-awareness very important. You have to know what you're doing. You just need to ask yourself regularly, and that helps you be confident in what you're doing. And so, not everyone has a passion. And so, even if you don't have a passion, acknowledge the fact that you don't have a passion, but you still want to develop a particular skill and you want to, work in that particular area because you're interested in it, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine. So,
Yes.
I think, yeah, those are the things to watch out for.
Yeah, that's very true. And like you said, if you don't have a passion or if you still are not sure yet what you want to do, it's just good to ask these questions from an early stage. You might not get an answer right away, but if you start early, then eventually you'll get an answer because it's there at the back of your mind.
Right,
So eventually you will realize. But that's a very important thing to be self-aware. So that's very true.
right.
So yeah, does what college you go to matter? I think maybe you already mentioned that, right? Or should I ask that again?
No, no, ask. It's fine.
Okay, all right. Okay, so what college you go to matter?
So in terms of college, I would say that it matters in some respects, but it also doesn't matter too much. So definitely, when you go to a good college, you have better opportunities, right? And you are more likely to be successful. But at the same time, if you're going to a college which might not have been your dream college, that doesn't mean that it's it doesn't mean that
Of the world,
you
yeah.
don't have any opportunities. Um,
Yes.
so to give an example, here at MIT, I see people from all different IITs who have come to do their PhDs or master's degrees. But I also see people from Punjab Engineering College. So I think
Mhm.
what matters is wherever you are, if you have proved yourself at that particular institution, if you have the drive, uh,
Mhm.
to do work or to do something that you're passionate about, then nothing can really stop you. The only difference is that maybe at a better college you're provided with opportunities and it's your choice to make use of them or not. But maybe at a different, so maybe at the person who's from Punjab Engineering College has to create opportunities for themselves. Right? You have to be driven. I know one of my friends, he contacted professors and he worked with professors online and he ended up publishing it in a very good journal.
Okay.
And then he's now at MIT. And so I think some of these stories are very inspiring. And then they go on to tell us that it doesn't really matter which college you went to. What matters is what work you did wherever you were and whether you excelled wherever you were. And I think as
Mhm.
long as you do that, you have your doors open for your future opportunities.
That's very true. And like you said, ask, like go out and ask for help.
Yes.
Usually people refrain from doing so, but I think I mean, worst case scenario, they might say no, but it's good to ask and
Right.
approach.
Yeah. It's always good to ask. It's always good to take initiative. And I mean, never hesitate and never be afraid of anything. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? Always think about what's the worst that can happen.
That's very true. That's very true. And I think one thing that I would like to add here is also like when you said giving back to the community, like the initiatives that you take, what you do for people outside. I think those things also really matter when you're applying for job or to any other institution or university, because they see that not only technically, but you are aware as a human being and you're doing your part to contribute your efforts towards the society as well. So I think those are also some things to keep in mind as well.
Right. I think these things also reflect your soft skills, which are very important. As we said,
True.
right, when you're working, whether you're working in academia or industry, you have to work with people around you. And if you've taken initiative to give back to the community, that inherently implies that you work with people, and it, I mean, indirectly helps you develop your soft skills, which
Definitely.
which again pays off in anywhere you go. So, and I think the other thing is, it also makes your own life more fulfilled when you do these kinds of things. So I think it's a win-win in both cases.
Right, right. Okay. Uh, okay. So Sugandha, have you come across any challenges in your life and how did you overcome them?
Oh yeah, for sure. Lots of challenges. So I think for me, one of the most important challenges is stress. There have been many times when I get stressed out during undergrad, and I mean during PhD. Even though this is my first year, still, there are lots of instances when you are just out of fuel and you don't know what to do. So I think it's very important to have something in your life to be centered and like have tools to address stress. So, for instance, I have this. I keep this singing bowl on my desk, and
Okay.
it's just
What does it do?
so basically I can just like make a
Ah,
thing.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So it
So
just calms you down.
it's very calming, and also it constantly reminds me that I should be staying in the present moment. So because a lot of the times when we are anxious, we are actually thinking about the past or about the future. So maybe I have an exam, maybe there's a deadline in the future, or maybe I didn't get good marks, or I fought with the professor or my supervisor or something like that. So I think we are psychologically our brains are such that it gets wound up in a loop, and if you're thinking about something, it keeps coming back to you. So this bowl just like helps me come back to the present moment and stay focused in the present moment. And I think there are many times when I get worried. So for instance, PhD application process is one example. It's very stressful, and during that time, you'll have a lot of things to worry about. But if you can't help it, give yourself time to worry. Give 15 minutes to yourself and say, okay, I'm going to worry for 15 minutes. And after that 15 minutes is gone, then you have make a to-do list, make a schedule, and just get on it. You have to keep doing things in order to avoid stress. And for me, I practice meditation, and that I found very helpful. It's just 20 minutes every day, and it completely changes your perspective in life, and also completely changes how you behave in the world, how you interact with other people. It improves your relationships and your communications with all the people around you, because you become very calm yourself, and you're more centered, and people are not able to push your buttons basically, so you won't be.
Yeah, that's an important thing. Yes.
Yeah. And
Yes.
interestingly, last term I took a course called Principles of Awareness. uh, I was very pleasantly surprised because it was an official course offered at MIT, in MIT Media Lab. And
Okay.
this was all about, being aware. And, we all had a practice, and everyone had a different practice. But every day doing that practice, journaling is one very important thing. If you're getting stressed, we are all social animals. So one important thing is to have friends around you. If you don't, build a community around you. Try to have connections, because sitting alone, especially in your room during grad school or undergrad, if you're an immigrant, is very hard. It can lead to depression, loneliness, and those are very, very big problems. And so it's important to have something else in your life. Have people to talk to, have these tools which you can use to manage stress, and maybe have some physical activity, play some sports or whatever. And I think those are the things. I think these are the major challenges. You get stressed, you get worried, and these things are important to keep you on track and bring you back whenever you're going off track.
That's true. Sorry, just give me a minute. I think to answer. I think somebody came by, so I could listen to their voices. I wasn't sure if it's being recorded in the video as well. So, but they just left. So it's all right. Yeah, I think about the social causes. I'll ask you right now, but I'll just bump it up in the beginning part so that it's related to when we were talking about that field. Like, how can this field help different social causes?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, so Sugandha, how can this field of computational neuroscience help solve different social causes or improve the quality of life?
Right. I think education is one very important field which neuroscience can address. So we are seeing these days that psychology and neuroscience are being clubbed together, because there's more and more need for psychologists and neuroscientists to be working together with each other in order to understand our brain and the mind. And that's what they've done at MIT. There's both psychology and neuroscience departments have been combined into a brain and cognitive sciences department.
Okay.
So that's so going from there, I think thinking about education is one field where it can contribute, and it is already contributing, in the sense that there are we all know that all of us learn at different pace. And right now our education system has teaching one to many kind of a mapping, where you have one instructor and you have 50 to 150 students, and then you're teaching them all at once. And I think the more we understand our brains, our psychological minds, the more we are becoming aware that different people are learning at different paces, and it might be important to have a different kind of an education system where you have targeted learning towards different sets of people, and in which you don't make people feel bad about their personalities, right? So I think Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg's wife, I think Priscilla Chan, she's spearheaded an initiative where she's, providing one-to-one education to children. So I think education is one area where we can, learn from neuroscience and psychology and think about how we can improve it. The other area is definitely health. So recently I went to MGH. MGH is the Mass General Hospital in Boston. And there I was sitting in one of the meetings where they were discussing cases. And I realized how people are going through so many difficult problems like obsessive compulsive disorders, depression, anxiety disorders. And all of these things are really scary. So for instance, there was one case in which a patient was constantly hitting their own eye or head because of an obsession. And there's definitely something wrong in the wiring of the brain, or something has gone wrong, but it's very difficult for them, right, to lead their life like that. Or some people have obsessions and they are constantly doing, like, they're checking the drawer 20 times within 2 minutes because of that obsession. And so there are there are treatments like deep brain stimulation, where they localize certain parts of the brain and then they stimulate and impart electrical impulses in order to set those things right. And in some cases they work, in some cases they don't, because we don't really understand the brain properly yet. So I think as we advance our understanding of the brain, it's going to be more and more helpful in the health sector for people whose lives are just scarred because of the irreversible mismatches.
Yeah. Okay. I think we are almost done. Just one last two questions. Okay, so what would you advise to the students out there if they want to stay updated with this field? How do they do that?
Updated with competition. I think specifically for computational neuroscience, there are specific journals which they can be looking at, like the Journal of Neuroscience, the Journal of Cognitive Science, there's Nature Neuroscience. So I think those are, and also going to conferences is always useful. When I first went to my first conference, it wasn't like I was presenting, but at the same time, just going to a conference for exposure really helps you to figure out what's going on in the field, and gives you an idea about what are the open questions in the field, so
Right.
you can get a better idea of what's going on. And other than that, I think if you're not having resources to be able to go to a conference, then many conferences are having online resources. And there are certain professors that you can follow. Everyone puts their papers on their website, so you don't have to purchase their papers. If you find yourself interested in the work of certain people, then you can always follow them and go to their websites, or even send them an email to request any additional material that you might want. And usually people answer.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good way, because like students might not understand the first time about the different terms, but at least they are getting to know, okay, what is this term, and they can always Google it up. So at least they're familiar with those terms, and eventually they can build their way up.
Right. I mean, in fact, that's how I came up with my master's thesis. I basically went to a conference and I saw, okay, these are the open questions or whatever. And it's not like I understood everything, but at least it gave me a gist. And then I was able to explore those areas further. So I think having exposure, whether it's online or through conferences or through talking to people in general, helps a lot.
Okay. All right. So one last question. If you had to give an advice to a student, like if they had to start today itself on this journey of computational neuroscience, what advice would you like to give them to start with?
I think specifically for computational neuroscience, I would encourage them to do their undergrads in a very quantitative field, either mathematics, physics, or engineering. That's important. And have have some knowledge of neuroscience on the side, so that they can build up their knowledge bank. In general, for neuroscience, that's not important. But if you're specifically targeting computational neuroscience, you have to have a quant background. And apart from them, that I think it's important to engage in other activities outside of your official academic work. So it's not important to do the same things that everyone else does. Everyone has a different personality, and so you need to figure out what matches with your personality, and you can take initiative in that direction, right? Whether it's forming groups, whether it's helping people outside of your school, whether it's just having learning nights where you have people come together and talk about either a particular field or even some random field. So be engaged in things outside of school as well, which can you know not only help develop your overall personality, but also help you in the long run in terms of developing your soft skills and enabling you to have a breadth of knowledge in addition to the depth that you're having through your undergrad.
Okay, that's awesome. Sugita, you have shared some amazing information with us about the field of computational neuroscience. And since it's not so widely used term that not many people are aware of it, you gave a very good idea of what people can expect from this field, what are its practical applications, and how should a student go ahead in this field, with what different concepts they should know, and how it is important to have that programming knowledge as well along with that. You talked about your journey and how you found your way. You gave some amazing tips to students on how to de-stress yourself and how to be around with people and go out, explore, and contribute to the society and clubs, take initiatives as well. So thank you so much for sharing such value-based knowledge, and I'm sure the students would have got a very good understanding and idea of this field and how they can proceed ahead. So thank you so much once again to be a part of this summit.
Thank you to you too. My pleasure to be able to contribute through this summit that you've organized. So thanks a lot to you.